Ever wondered what is a pipeline? What is a middleware when people talking about it? Let's wrap our heads around it. Hello and welcome to Code with Sar. I'm Sar. How are you doing? This is the 8th episode of Build a Library with me. We talk about everything that you need to know to build a library. After the fundamental topics like extension method, options, delegate, today we're going to talk a very important one, ASP.NET Core pipeline and middlewares. There's going to be simple fundamental topics like the concept and the basic usages. I will also show you how to build a pipeline by yourself. Without further ado, let's get started. Let's start by taking a look at the pipeline I built. And you probably are wondering at this moment, what am I looking at? 5 lines of console output? Yes, but please let me explain. To output those 5 lines of text, I've built a pipeline, and there are 3 components. Component 1 is responsible for outputting incoming 1, and then hands it over to component 2 to output incoming 2. Then it gives it to component T. By the way, T stands for terminal. To output this is the last one, there's no next. And then it goes back to our component 2's hands to output outgoing 2. So on and so forth until it goes back to the component 1, then the pipeline finished. Yes? And so what? Why I did that, and why does it matter? Because this is how ASP.NET Core pipeline works for each and single request, every request. So it is very important to understand. Let's take a look at it. If we think about it, ASP.NET Core Web API only have one responsibility, that is handling requests and give back a response. For example, the user from the browser requests a list of products. ASP.NET Core will route the request to products controller and give back a list of products. Programmers like us write the logic in products controller. But have you ever wondered, why does ASP.NET Core give the request to the products controller? That is done by something called a root middleware. There are actually a handful of them. The 3 popular ones on the screen, for example. HTTPS redirect middleware redirects HTTP traffic to HTTPS endpoint. Static files middleware serves static files. Routing or routing middleware serves, decides where the traffic goes to. So we call it a pipeline with 3 middlewares at this moment. And every coming request goes through the pipeline. A pipeline has 2 very important characteristics. It's extensible, so we can freely adding or removing middlewares. For example, we could add another middleware for authorization. And if we know we would not deal with the static files, we could remove the static files middleware. So extensible, and another is that order matters. You would want to put HTTPS redirect middleware in front of the pipeline, if not the first one. Because if user hits the HTTP endpoint, this one will redirect it to the HTTPS endpoint, and the rest of the middlewares won't even see the request. And this is called a short circuit, and that saves computing. On the other hand, authorization middleware probably need to be put later in the pipe, at least later than the routine middleware, so it could leverage the output for the routine. That's what we call an ASP.NET Core middleware pipeline. Let's take a look at the code. We have been looking into this startup class several times, because it is so important to decide how the web API behaves, right? We've covered the configure services method a lot in the topic of dependency injection, as well as I configuration, and also I logging. Now let's take a look at this configure method on line 31. Almost everything is dealing with this highlighted app object, which is an I application builder, and that is actually where the request pipeline set up. Let's ignore the settings for development for a while. Starting line 40, we firstly add HTTPS redirection middleware, then routing, then authorizing, then use endpoints. So we have 4 middlewares configured for the pipeline. Notice I have hello.html in the project, but I don't put the static files middleware in the pipeline. So even if the user hits the hello.html in the browser, they're not going to see it. So let me add the middleware that can handle static files. We're going to call app.useStaticFiles. These use something methods or extension methods to add middlewares into the pipeline. I'll reveal more details about it in a bit, But for now, let's see how it looks like when the middleware is added. How it works. The ASP.NET Core made it so easy to add or removing a middleware. How was it done? Coming next, I'll show you how did I mimic the pipeline. And the result would be the demo that I showed you earlier at the beginning of the video. Now, you don't have to know how to build a pipeline to use it. It definitely helps understand why middleware shapes like that. Let me be upfront here. This is not a fundamental topic, this is an advanced one. I can't afford to explain everything, so I'm just going to focus on the core. I'll go fast, and I'll share the code. But feel free to leave me a comment if I didn't explain anything clear. So, buckle up, let's go! To build a pipeline, the first question that I need to answer is how to do the chain. And my thinking on that is to have a component unit. It will do some logic to deal with the request, then it will call the next. Once next is done, it would become the chance to deal with the response. Since the current component, if you think about that, would not know what next really is, it will take in the delegate, a function of task to be precise. Now, switch the mind, the current component could be used as the next as well. So current will need to return a function of t. And one component as a unit will look like it is on the screen now. Now, what if we add a second component into the picture? The output for the first component will become the input for the second component, and then the third component, and so on and so forth. Two things I want to point out here. Firstly, when I'm gathering these components, I don't want to execute them. I just want to hold down like what needs to happen when execution happens. So the component by itself sounds like a delegate. Second, the order for execution currently for component 1 and 2, and then if you think carefully about it, it's in the reversed order. What I mean is, component 1's output is the next for component 2. That means component 2 needs to run first, then next to component 1. And that's not what I want. To address that, in the program world, it's simple, we just reverse the order. Now let's take a look at the implementation. I'll start with an empty console application, so there's no project template magic. The first thing that I want to have is a list that holds the components, aka middlewares. To support asynchronous, a component would be a delegate that takes the same function of task as input, and then a function of task as output. And since this is a pipeline, well, we're going to hold a list of them. The second thing that I have on my mind to have is an add method. This one's simple, to add one component into the component list. And the last essential piece is a run method. This one goes through the components that is in the list in the reversed order, as we just discussed earlier. The next component for the last component is actually nothing, so I just complete the task immediately. Then, in the loop, it invokes a piece, which will return a function of task, which becomes the next of the next component, and then do it one by one. Here, I am returning a function of task to let the caller decide when to really invoke it. I could also invoke it directly and return the task. It's just a personal preference. Now that the essentials are there, let's take a look at how to use it. Firstly, let's create an instance of a pipeline, and then we're going to add a component. Well, the component takes in the next delegate and by itself returns a delegate. And within this delegate, it will output a message incoming, and then it will go ahead and call the next component. Once the next component is done, it will come back to output the outgoing message. Now, if we want to run this, we're going to call the run method, and it returns a function of task. We go ahead and invoke it. Well, the main method needs to be updated to run the async method directly. Now, actually, let me add another component so that we can see both components running. Okay, everything seems ready. Let's run it. So incoming 1, incoming 2, outgoing 1. Imagine incomings are requests and outgoings are responses. Then we have the pipeline. Okay, this is a bonus since you stayed with me all the way for all this nonsense. Let's optimize the add method for the end user. Let's take a look at it. As we implemented the pipeline, we know we want a delegate so that the content won't be executed immediately. That mismatches what the users want. What do I mean? The user do not need to know about wrapping everything up into a delegate actually. Oh, and by user, I mean middleware authors. Anyway, they should focus on the logic rather than, hey, providing a delegate, something like that. And to implement that, we need the pipeline to take on the responsibility of wrapping a task into a function of task. Let me show you what I mean. Instead of adding the component directly, the user is going to provide a delegate that takes in the next component as a function of task, but they don't need to return a function of task. They just return a task. And we will wrap it up into a function of task so that it having the input of a function of task and the output of a function of task, and that becomes a component. Let's see the consumer code, and you're probably going to get a better idea what I'm talking about. I'll use the new use method to add a third component into the pipeline. As you can see, it is one less wrapper for the end user's code. Let's run it again. It looks like it runs well. Go back to ASP.NET Core. This is actually one of the ways for the middleware author to put in middleware into the pipeline. Actually, I think this is the core method because everything else is just the sugars around it. For us, not only we know how to use it, we know what is happening under the hood now. Okay, that's it. Quiz time. What is the pipeline? What is the middleware? What are the major characteristics for the pipeline? When we're adding middlewares into the pipeline, does the order matter, and why? Have you pressed the like button yet? And did you subscribe? Alright everyone, I hope you enjoyed it. Keep coding, keep improving. Now I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care.